My name is Mark. For 6 years, I was an organ procurement specialist with the Chesapeake Organ Sharing Alliance, based out of Baltimore. Before that, I spent nearly a decade as an ICU nurse, so I've been on the front lines of life and death for a long time. In my role as a specialist, I personally facilitated over 400 donations, which means I sat with hundreds of grieving families in their darkest hours and helped orchestrate the complex, beautiful process that allows life to continue from an ending. I thought I understood the full spectrum of human grief, the sacred weight of my profession, and the unbreachable line between medical ethics and the unthinkable. I've seen families torn apart by tragedy come together to give the most profound gift possible, and I believed I knew the absolute boundaries of what my job entailed. But about 8 months ago, one harvest, one donor, changed everything I thought I knew about the sanctity of the system I served. What happened was so deeply disturbing, so fundamentally wrong, that I walked into my director's office 2 weeks after the case concluded and handed in my resignation. This case didn't just haunt me. It shattered the very foundation of my work, a foundation I had dedicated my life to building. What I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you think you know about organ donation. It sounds like something from a medical thriller, but every single word is the absolute truth, and it reveals a darkness hiding in the one place you would never, ever expect to find it. To understand why this one case broke me, you have to understand the job. Being an ICU nurse was grueling. You fight tooth and nail to save a life, and when you lose, the defeat is a physical weight. I saw so many good people, so many families, left with nothing but heartbreak after a long, painful battle in the intensive care unit. I transitioned to organ procurement because I wanted to find meaning in the loss. I wanted to be the person who could offer a sliver of light in that suffocating darkness. The job of an organ procurement specialist or a coordinator is a strange hybrid of skills. You have to be a grief counselor, a medical expert, a logistics wizard, and a diplomat all at once. The pager goes off at 2 a.m. and you're driving to a hospital an hour away, walking into the most emotionally charged room you can imagine. Your job is to talk to a family who has just been told their loved one is gone, that their brain has irreversibly ceased to function. You have to guide them through that initial shock, and then, at the appropriate moment, you have to ask them to consider donation. It's the hardest question you can ever ask. Our organization, the Chesapeake Organ Sharing Alliance, or COSA, was one of the most respected OPOs, organ procurement organizations, in the country. We had a high consent rate and a reputation for being meticulous, compassionate, and professional. My boss, Susan, the director of clinical operations, was the embodiment of that reputation. She was in her late 50s, sharp, pragmatic, and ran our department with military precision. For Susan, the mission was everything: honor the donor, serve the family, and save the recipient. The process was a sacred trust, and the rules were the scripture. We followed protocols to the letter because those protocols protected everyone: the donor, the family, the recipients, and us. Deviating from them was not an option. The call came in on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a referral from a community hospital in a suburban county just outside the city. The case seemed tragically straightforward. A 28-year-old male, identified from his driver's license as John Smith, had been in a single-vehicle accident. He'd lost control of his car and hit a concrete abutment. He was found unresponsive at the scene, intubated by paramedics, and flown to the trauma center. Despite their best efforts, his intracranial pressure was too high. He'd herniated. The neurology team had performed 2 separate brain death examinations, 6 hours apart, confirming what they already knew. He was legally and medically deceased. The ICU nurse on the phone was efficient. "Family is at the bedside," she said. "They seem to be handling it as well as can be expected. The primary physician has been notified. He's ready for your approach." It was a routine I'd performed hundreds of times. I grabbed my go bag, reviewed the initial medical chart faxed over to our office, and drove to the hospital. The file was thin, as is often the case with young, healthy people. John Smith, 28 years old. No significant past medical history. Blood type O positive, the universal donor. Perfect candidate. My job was to see if his family would be willing to turn this senseless tragedy into a miracle for up to 8 other people. I met the family in a small, sterile consultation room. It was a woman who introduced herself as his mother, Carol, and a man she said was his uncle, her brother, named David. I began as I always do, by offering my deepest condolences. I listened as they spoke about John. Their words were sufficient. They said he was a quiet young man, worked in IT, kept to himself. But something felt off. It's a gut feeling you develop in this line of work. Grief has 1,000 faces, but it has a certain texture, a weight. Theirs felt thin like a poorly constructed stage play. Carol's eyes were dry. David's posture was relaxed, almost casual. They asked procedural questions with a strange detachment, more like they were inquiring about a car repair than the final arrangements for their son and nephew. When I gently broached the topic of donation, the response was immediate. "Yes, of course," Carol said, almost before I had finished the sentence. John would have wanted that. He was a very giving person. There was no hesitation, no soul-searching, none of the agonizing deliberation I was so accustomed to. They signed the consent forms quickly, their hands steady. While quick consent isn't unheard of, their eagerness, combined with their lack of palpable emotion, was unusual. It was the first small tear in the fabric of a normal case. I chalked it up to shock. People process trauma in different ways, I told myself. My job wasn't to judge their grief, it was to honor their decision. With the signed consent, the process kicked into high gear. John Smith was now officially a donor. My role shifted from counselor to medical manager. I took over his care from the ICU staff, working with a team of nurses to maintain his vitals, to keep the organs perfused and healthy. We started him on a battery of medications, drew blood for serology and HLA typing to check for diseases and determine tissue compatibility. Every hour was critical. The longer a donor is maintained on a ventilator, the higher the risk of complications. It's a race against the clock. I entered his data into the UNO's national database. His age, his blood type, his medical information. Almost immediately, the system began generating potential matches. A 45-year-old father of 3 in Virginia who needed a heart. A 19-year-old college student in Pennsylvania on dialysis, waiting for a kidney. A 60-year-old woman in Maryland whose liver was failing. These weren't just names on a list. They were lives hanging in the balance. The weight of that responsibility is immense. It's what keeps you going. But the little inconsistencies kept piling up, like grit in a well-oiled machine. I needed to get a more detailed medical and social history, a standard part of the process to ensure the safety of the organs. I called the number the family had provided for John's primary care physician. The receptionist was confused. "We don't have a patient by that name," she said. "We've never had a John Smith with that date of birth." That was a major red flag. Sometimes records get mixed up, but this was a flat denial. I called the family back to double-check. The number for Carol, the mother, went straight to a generic voicemail. The number for David, the uncle, was already disconnected. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. This was no longer just unusual. It was concerning. I went back to the paperwork. The address on John's driver's license was A.P.O. box in a town 30 miles away. The address the family had given on the consent form was for an apartment complex in a different city. I used our hospital's access to a basic public records search. The P.O. box was real, but the apartment, the unit number they provided didn't exist. I was standing in the donor's ICU room, looking at the man on the ventilator. His face was unmarred, peaceful. He looked young and strong. Who was he? The story I had been given was starting to crumble. I was managing the physiology of a man whose entire identity was becoming a question mark. My training, my experience, everything in my professional life was about procedure and protocol. But my instincts, the part of me that had held the hands of dying patients for almost 2 decades, were screaming that something was terribly wrong. This wasn't just a grieving family behaving strangely. This was something else. Something I had never encountered before. And I was the one who had to figure it out, with the lives of at least 3 people on that recipient list hanging on every decision I made. The clock was ticking, not just on the viability of the organs, but on whatever truth was buried beneath the surface of John Smith. The feeling of professional inadequacy began to creep in. My job was built on a foundation of trust. Trust in the hospital's declaration of death. Trust in the family's consent. Trust in the identity of the donor. Now all of it was in question. I took my concerns to Susan. I found her in her office, surrounded by spreadsheets and allocation charts. I laid out the discrepancies. The non-existent physician, the disconnected phone numbers, the conflicting addresses, the family's strange demeanor. I expected her to share my concern, to pause the process, to authorize a deeper look. Her reaction was the opposite. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Mark," she said, her voice calm but firm. "What do you have legally? You have a body declared dead by 2 independent neurologists. You have a valid driver's license for identification. And you have a signed, witnessed consent form from next of kin. Am I missing anything?" I started to protest. "But Susan, the family?" She cut me off. "The family is grieving, or they're in shock, or they're just strange people. It doesn't matter. Our job is not to be private investigators. Our job is to facilitate the donation. We have a perfect heart, 2 perfect kidneys, and a liver for a status 1A patient who won't make it through the week. We follow the paperwork. We follow the protocol. That's how we protect the mission." Her words felt like a door slamming shut. It was the first time I felt the cold machinery of the institution pushing against me. It wasn't about the truth. It was about the process. The system was designed to move forward, and my doubts were just friction. This was the beginning of a profound sense of institutional betrayal. I was a part of the system, I believed in it, but it was now telling me to ignore my own professional judgment. I felt a chilling sense of moral isolation. I was the only one standing in the way, the only one asking questions. I walked out of her office feeling more alone than I ever had in my career. Couldn't let it go. This wasn't just about a procedural anomaly anymore. It was about the man in that bed. He deserved to be known. He deserved to have his real story told, not this flimsy, fabricated one. A protective instinct I didn't know I had kicked in. I had to know who he was. The clock was ticking louder now. The surgical recovery team was being assembled. The lead surgeon was a man named Dr. Robert Evans. I'd worked with him on dozens of cases. He was in his late 40s, brilliant, intense, and deeply respected. He was a man of science and data, not hunches. But he was also a friend. I decided to take a risk. I found him in the surgeon's lounge, reviewing the donor's chart. "Rob," I said, keeping my voice low, "I need to talk to you about this case. Something's not right." I laid it all out for him just as I had for Susan. He listened, his eyes never leaving the chart in his hands. He heard about the fake doctor, the disconnected numbers, the ghost apartment. When I was done, he was silent for a long moment. "It's weird, Mark. I'll give you that," he finally said. "But what does it change? The medical data is solid. The serologies are clean, the crossmatch is negative. The organs are pristine. I have a patient, a schoolteacher with 3 kids, whose heart is giving out. She's my priority. Unless you can give me a concrete medical or legal reason to stop, we have to proceed." The ethics of the situation demand it. He wasn't being dismissive like Susan. He was being a surgeon. He was weighing the tangible, a dying patient, against my intangible, unsubstantiated fears. He was right from his perspective, but it felt like another door closing. Everyone was focused on the recipients, on the life-saving potential. And I was too. That was the terrible conflict raging inside me. Was I about to sabotage multiple miracles because of a gut feeling? Was my professional unease worth more than a woman's life? The stakes were astronomical. My career, my reputation were on the line. But so was the identity of this dead man. I went back to my temporary workstation at the hospital, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something huge. I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe he was in witness protection. I made a discreet, confidential inquiry through a channel we sometimes used for sensitive cases. The response came back within an hour. No federal flags, no protected status associated with his identity or fingerprints. I considered the possibility that he was undocumented, using a forged identity. But even then, there were usually traces, connections, a history somewhere. This man was a ghost. The system was moving on without me. Flights were being booked for the organ transplant teams. Operating rooms were being scheduled. The recipients were being prepped for surgery, their families overcome with hope and relief. I was becoming an obstruction, a problem to be managed. My colleague, another coordinator named Maria, pulled me aside in the hallway. "Mark, I heard you talk to Susan," she whispered. "Be careful. She's not happy. I think it's weird, too, but it's not our place. Don't ruin your career over this." She was scared, and her fear only amplified my isolation. She saw what I saw, but the institutional pressure was too great. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I could either step back, let the process play out, and live with the gnawing uncertainty for the rest of my life, or I could jump. I decided to jump. I took out my personal credit card and paid for the most comprehensive, deep background check I could find online, one that scraped social media, public records, and other digital breadcrumbs that standard checks might miss. I uploaded the photo from John Smith's driver's license and the few details I had. It was a long shot, a desperate last-ditch effort. I hit submit and waited, the sterile hum of the hospital ICU a deafening roar in my ears. For hours, nothing. The preliminary results showed the same dead ends. The name John Smith was too common, the date of birth linked to nothing. The allocation process was finalized. The heart was going to Virginia, the liver to a local hospital. The kidneys were being split between 2 centers in Pennsylvania. Dr. Evans and his surgical team were scheduled to begin the recovery in less than 3 hours. It was over. I had failed. I sat there, defeated, staring at the screen. I felt a profound sense of professional inadequacy. My instincts had led me down a rabbit hole with no exit, and in the process I had alienated my boss and worried my colleagues. Then, an email notification popped up. "Your comprehensive report has been updated." My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked the link. The page loaded, and I scrolled down past the familiar dead ends. And then I saw it. A small section I hadn't seen before, labeled Potential Image Recognition Matches. The service's algorithm had cross-referenced the driver's license photo with billions of images online. There was one match. It was a grainy photo from a local news website in a small town in Ohio. The article was dated 5 years ago. It was a story about a family pleading for information about their missing son. I clicked on the article. The photo was of a smiling young man at a high school graduation. It was him. It was the face of the man lying in the ICU bed down the hall. But the name wasn't John Smith. The article identified him as Daniel Miller. He was 23 years old when he disappeared, not 28. He had vanished from his college campus 5 years ago without a trace, leaving his car, his wallet, and all his belongings in his dorm room. His family had been searching for him ever since. The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't a hunch anymore. It was proof. The man in that bed was not John Smith. He was Daniel Miller, a missing person. The family who had signed the consent forms were imposters. The consent, the legal pillar upon which this entire life-saving enterprise was built, was fraudulent. It was null and void. A wave of nausea washed over me as the implications crashed down. This wasn't just a case of a mistaken or forged identity. This was something far more sinister. Why would someone go to the trouble of creating a fake identity for a missing person, only for him to die in a random car accident? I pulled up the initial paramedic report from the accident scene, my hands shaking. I read it again, but this time, I was looking for something else. And I found it. A small note from the first responding officer. Scene is unusual. Vehicle has minimal exterior damage, inconsistent with a high-speed impact against a concrete abutment. Significant damage is localized to the driver's side A-pillar and roof, suggesting a different mechanism of injury. They had chalked it up as an anomaly, but now it looked like a clue. The accident wasn't an accident. It was staged. It had been designed to cause a fatal, isolated head injury while leaving the rest of the body, the precious organs, intact. This was a murder. A carefully planned, medically sophisticated murder, designed to look like a tragedy. And the motive was the organs themselves. My blood ran cold. The system I had dedicated my life to, the beautiful, sacred process of turning death into life, was being used as a disposal method for a homicide. It was being co-opted as part of a criminal enterprise. The horror of it was absolute, a darkness so profound it felt like it was swallowing me whole. The surgical team was scrubbing in. Dr. Evans was probably already in the operating room. I had minutes. I grabbed my phone and bypassed everyone. I called Susan first, my voice tight with a mixture of terror and vindication. Susan, his name is Daniel Miller. He's a missing person from Ohio. I have the proof. The consent is fraudulent. The accident was staged. We are about to harvest organs from a murder victim. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then her voice came back, no longer calm, but dangerously sharp. Mark, you stand down. Right now. Do you hear me? You have no authority to make these claims. We have a legal consent for a John Smith. The hospital's legal team has approved it. If you interfere with this procurement, I will have your certification, and I will end your career. We are proceeding. It was the ultimate betrayal. She knew. In that moment, I believe she knew I was telling the truth, but the machine was too big to stop. The potential liability, the scandal. It was easier to be willfully blind. It was easier to follow the flawed paperwork than to face the monstrous reality. She was choosing the system over a human life, over the truth. I hung up on her. My hands were trembling, but my mind was crystal clear. I had one last chance. I called the main number for the operating room and demanded to be put through to Dr. Evans. The nurse on the line resisted. He's in a sterile field, sir. This is Mark from the Organ Alliance, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. It is a life-or-death emergency regarding the donor. Put him on speaker. Now. There was a frantic shuffling, and then I heard Rob's voice, muffled by his mask. What is it, Mark? We're about to make the incision. I took a deep breath. Rob, stop. Do not touch him. His name is Daniel Miller. He's a missing person from Ohio. I have the missing persons report. The family who consented are imposters. The consent is fraudulent. The police report suggests the crash was staged. We are part of a crime scene. The line went silent. I could hear the faint, rhythmic beep of the monitors connected to Daniel's body. I could picture the scene. The bright lights, the green drapes, the team of surgeons and nurses, all frozen in place, staring at the phone. I had just thrown a grenade into the most sterile, controlled environment in the hospital. I had just asked a surgeon to trust my frantic, rule-breaking words over months of his own training and the entire institutional protocol. After what felt like an eternity, Rob's voice came back, quiet but firm. Instruments down. Everyone stepped back from the table. He had done it. He had listened. He had made the choice. The aftermath was chaos. The ore was sealed. Hospital security arrived, followed shortly by the local police. I was taken to a secure room and told not to speak to anyone. I forwarded the missing persons report and the background check to the head of hospital security from my phone. Within an hour, detectives were swarming the ICU. The case was taken out of my hands and became a full-blown criminal investigation. Susan arrived at the hospital, her face a mask of fury. She tried to have me removed, accusing me of insubordination, of recklessly endangering the lives of the recipients. But it was too late. The truth was out. The hospital's legal team, faced with the evidence of a fraudulent consent and a potential homicide on their premises, sided with me. They shut down the entire procurement process indefinitely. The investigation unfolded with terrifying speed. The police, now armed with Daniel Miller's real identity, were able to connect the dots. The fake mother and uncle were identified through surveillance footage. They were part of a sophisticated criminal ring. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. The organization targeted vulnerable young people, runaways, addicts, those estranged from their families. They would give them new identities, a place to live, and a menial job, effectively holding them in a state of isolated dependency for years. They were human beings being farmed. When a lucrative, specific organ match was needed on the black market, or when a high-paying client was willing to exploit gray areas in the legal system, the ring would stage an accident. They had medical knowledge. They knew exactly how to cause a catastrophic, non-survivable brain injury while preserving the torso. They would then pose as the grieving family, provide the fake identity, and push for a rapid organ donation. The legitimate, life-saving UNO system was their laundry service, a way to clean the organs and provide a plausible, official explanation for their origin. The recipients would be legitimate patients on the waiting list, unaware that the gift of life they were receiving was born from a monstrous crime. My actions had not just saved Daniel Miller's body from being the final piece of that crime. They had cracked open a conspiracy that was operating in the shadows of the medical system itself. The FBI got involved. The Chesapeake Organ Sharing Alliance was placed under federal investigation. Susan was fired, though she claimed she was a victim of my reckless actions until the very end. The investigation is still ongoing, but I know it's led to arrests in 3 different states. As for me, my career was over. I was vindicated by the investigation, and Dr. Evans, who was hailed as a hero, credited me publicly. But the damage was done. The trust was gone. I couldn't look at a consent form, a grieving family, or a donor chart without seeing the ghost of Daniel Miller. I couldn't hear the hum of an ICU without wondering what darkness lay beneath the surface. The system I had loved, the mission I had believed in, had been corrupted, and I had seen its darkest corner. It was a professional cost I had to pay. I had to sacrifice my career to uphold the very principles it was supposed to be built on. I resigned 2 weeks after that night. I couldn't be a part of it anymore. The existential questions were too loud. If this could happen once, how many other times had it happened? How many other John Does in morgues and ICUs across the country were really missing people? Their stories erased, their bodies harvested. It shattered my entire worldview. I work in a library now. It's quiet. The stakes are low. But the impact of that night is permanent. I still wake up sometimes thinking about Daniel Miller's real family. The police were able to contact them. After 5 years of agonizing uncertainty, they finally learned what happened to their son. They got to bring him home. Not in the way they had prayed for, but it was a resolution. It was the truth. And in the end, I suppose that's what I was fighting for. Not just the organs, not just the recipients, but for the fundamental truth of a person's life. I exposed a horror and I paid a price. And I would do it again. But it changed me forever. And it forces me to ask a question that still keeps me awake at night. In a system that depends on the bodies of the dead, who is truly watching out for them?